spooky place.
Have you ever been dared to touch something you knew you shouldn't? Imagine feeling the chill of an unseen presence creeping over you, whispering in a language that's not your own. And just when you think it's over, the nightmare follows you, and you won't be having a good sleep tonight. Before we begin, I request you to like the video and subscribe to the channel. On that note, let's begin. The Vanishing Mourner. In the small town of Black Hollow, an ancient cemetery sat perched on the edge of the fog-covered hills. The locals spoke of its chilling presence in whispered tones, especially about a ghostly figure who appeared on moonlit nights, the woman in the veil. Her mournful sobs echoed through the graveyard, her form concealed beneath a long, black veil. She wandered to different graves every night, weeping inconsolably, only to vanish when approached, leaving behind an overwhelming sense of dread. No one knew who she was or why she cried, and those who ventured close to ask were never the same again. The town had lived with this mystery for generations, but for William, a young historian with a keen interest in the occult, it was more than just a story. He had heard of the woman from his grandmother, who had grown up near the cemetery, but it wasn't until William found an old journal belonging to his great-great-grandmother Eleanor that he began to uncover a darker, more twisted truth. Eleanor had written about the cemetery in her own time, but her words hinted at something more than a mere ghostly presence. She spoke of a curse tied to the land, something ancient and malignant, and it was this very curse that brought the woman in the veil back night after night. As William delved deeper into the mystery, he discovered more about his family's past. The Blackwood family had lived in Black Hollow for centuries, and their lineage was entwined with the town's dark history. His great-great-grandmother Eleanor had been one of the few to survive the horrors that had claimed the Blackwoods before her. Horrors that began with the arrival of Isabella Blackwood, a powerful witch who had forged an unholy pact with an ancient entity, seeking immortality in exchange for the souls of her descendants. But immortality came with a price. Isabella's descendants would be doomed to a life filled with death, loss, and the constant whisper of the curse. And those who attempted to break the curse would only bring it closer to completion. William's investigation takes him to the local church, where he meets a priest named Father Marcus, who claims to know about the curse. Father Marcus insists he's been protecting the town from the curse for years, acting as a guardian of sorts, keeping the cemetery sealed from any who would disturb it. He warns William to leave the graveyard alone, but something about Father Marcus seems off. His demeanor is too urgent, his eyes too knowing. In his own research, William finds evidence that Father Marcus's family line was once connected to the Blackwoods. The priest's bloodline had been tasked with guarding the Blackwood curse, but not to protect the town, as he claimed. Father Marcus had been trying to keep the curse contained, ensuring that no one discovered the truth about the Blackwood Pact and the dark force behind it. As William digs deeper, he learns that Father Marcus is not merely a guardian. He is part of a covert lineage of protectors who have kept the curse alive, ensuring that no one ever escapes the grip of death. Father Marcus had been feeding off the curse's energy, hoping to prolong his own life by manipulating those who came too close. But now, William's bloodline had triggered the next phase of the curse, and Father Marcus was determined to stop him from breaking it. Amidst all his investigations, William finally discovers the hidden grave mentioned in Eleanor's journal, the grave of Isabella Blackwood, which had been concealed by centuries of lies. Beneath the moss-covered stone, William finds a secret compartment containing a strange, dark artifact, a pendant made from a cursed gemstone that pulses with an eerie, otherworldly glow. The pendant had once been worn by Isabella herself, but its power had long since been dormant. When William touches the pendant, a flood of visions overwhelms him. He sees Isabella Blackwood's desperate pact with the dark entity, the immense power she sought to gain, and the twisted price she paid. He learns that the pendant had been the key to sealing her soul to the cemetery. In death, she had become bound to the land, unable to rest, forever weeping for the lives lost because of her greed. But the pendant holds a darker secret. It is the key to releasing the curse, but doing so would unleash the dark entity itself, allowing it to feed on the souls of the living. The curse would not only claim William, but would spread, consuming Black Hollow and beyond. Plot twist 3: the identity of the woman in the veil. As William wrestles with the knowledge of the pendant's power, he confronts the woman in the veil once again in the cemetery. This time, however, when she whispers her haunting question, "Do you know where they've gone?" William suddenly understands that the woman is not just some lost spirit. She is Isabella Blackwood, trapped in an endless cycle of grief and regret. The veil that covers her face is not a mourning garment. It is a magical barrier that keeps her soul bound to the earth, unable to pass into the afterlife. But there's a twist. The curse doesn't only tie Isabella's soul to the cemetery, it ties all of her descendants to it. Every generation of Blackwoods is fated to encounter her, and in every encounter, they must choose: break the curse and unleash the dark entity, or become part of the entity's growing army of souls, each forever tethered to the cemetery. William is faced with an impossible choice. He must either destroy the pendant, which would condemn him to a life of servitude to the dark entity, or use it to break the curse, and in doing so, unleash the full wrath of the ancient being. But the entity has a plan of its own. As William contemplates his decision, he realizes that his choice is already made. He has already fallen victim to the curse. As William prepares to destroy the pendant, he is confronted by Father Marcus, who reveals the final truth. The Blackwood family was never meant to break the curse. Instead, they were meant to contain it, sacrificing their bloodline to keep the dark entity imprisoned for eternity. But the pendants, once thought to be the source of the curse, were actually the wards that kept the entity from breaking free. The moment William touched the pendant, the entity had awakened, and it had begun to reach for the world beyond the cemetery. As William prepares to destroy the pendant, he is confronted by Father Marcus, who reveals the final truth. The Blackwood family was never meant to break the curse. Instead, they were meant to contain it, sacrificing their bloodline to keep the dark entity imprisoned for eternity. But the pendants, once thought to be the source of the curse, were actually the wards that kept the entity from breaking free. The moment William touched the pendant, the entity had awakened, and it had begun to reach for the world beyond the cemetery. Father Marcus tells William that his own ancestors were the true betrayers. They had tried to destroy the entity once before, but their attempt failed. Now, William must choose whether to let the entity be released, or become a new protector for the cursed family, allowing the cycle of death and despair to continue. In the end, the woman in the veil, the tragic Isabella Blackwood, is revealed to be both a victim and a tool of the curse. She is the one who watches over each Blackwood descendant, ensuring they fulfill their role in the Dark Pact. The story ends with William standing before the altar of the cursed grave, torn between duty and freedom. He realizes that his decision will shape the fate of his town, and the very nature of life and death in Black Hollow. The woman in the veil watches silently, her sorrow now mixed with the glimmer of hope, as William's choice becomes inevitable. The curse will continue, or perhaps, this time, it will end. The graveyard shift guard. As for Nolan, he tried to forget, but sometimes, in the still of the night, when the air grew thick with unease, he would hear the laughter once more, as though the children were never truly gone, waiting, just beyond the veil of the living, for the next person to stumble upon their tomb. Years after Nolan's harrowing escape from St. Helena Cemetery, the mystery of the mausoleum and the children remained unsolved. The cemetery's eerie reputation only grew, attracting more thrill seekers and paranormal investigators. each hoping to unravel its dark secrets. But the whispers, the laughter, and the shadowy figures persisted, taunting those who dared to venture into the graveyard at night. One evening, a young journalist named Evelyn Martell arrived in New Orleans with the intent to write a piece about the city's haunted history. Having heard the legends of St. Helena, she was determined to uncover the truth behind the stories. Unlike the many visitors before her, Evelyn was not easily spooked. She had spent years researching the supernatural and had come prepared with cameras, audio equipment, and a deep desire for answers. Her research quickly led her to the cemetery and to the mausoleum that had haunted so many. Evelyn learned that the Blackwell family, long known for their wealth and influence in New Orleans, had once occupied the crypt. But there were no records of any family members being buried there in recent decades. Rumors, however, suggested something more sinister. The family's sudden disappearance had been linked to a powerful, ancient curse tied to their bloodline, something that had kept their souls trapped in the cemetery, unable to move on. Intrigued, Evelyn began spending her nights in the cemetery, determined to uncover the truth. On her third night, she experienced the same chilling events that had plagued the security guards and visitors before her. The cold whispers, the laughter of unseen children, and the feeling of being watched. But Evelyn pressed on, her resolve only growing stronger. Then, one night, as the fog rolled in thick around the tombstones, Evelyn discovered something that would change everything. While investigating the mausoleum, she noticed an engraving on one of the nearby crypts, a name that had never appeared in any of the town records: Lilith Blackwell. The name struck her like a bolt of lightning. Evelyn knew that Lilith Blackwell was believed to have been the last matriarch of the Blackwell family, rumored to have been a witch who had made a pact with an ancient, malevolent force to ensure her family's wealth and power. According to legend, Lilith had been the one to curse her descendants, binding their souls to the cemetery when the pact turned dark. However, what Evelyn uncovered next was far more disturbing. Hidden beneath the overgrown ivy and moss was a small, concealed entrance to a hidden chamber beneath the mausoleum. The air inside the chamber was thick with the scent of decay, but Evelyn's flashlight illuminated something even more unsettling. Etched into the stone floor were the faint remnants of a large, intricate circle inscribed with strange symbols. In the center of the circle lay a blood-stained altar, long abandoned, but still emanating an oppressive energy. As Evelyn stepped closer to the altar, a cold wind swept through the chamber, and the shadows seemed to pulse around her. The whispers began again, louder this time, reverberating in the confined space. A child's laughter echoed from the darkness, and Evelyn felt a growing unease settle over her. But then a voice, deep, ancient, and almost familiar, spoke to her. "You've unlocked the door." A figure emerged from the shadows, its form barely visible in the dim light. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as she realized it wasn't a child, but something much older. It was Lilith Blackwell, her ghostly form hovering just above the ground, her eyes hollow and empty. The woman's face was contorted in agony, her lips curled into a twisted smile. "You think you can free them?" Lilith rasped, her voice a hollow echo of its former self. "You think you can break the curse?" Evelyn stumbled backward, realizing with horror that the children's laughter wasn't just a haunting. It was the sound of trapped souls, forever bound to the mausoleum. These were not innocent spirits, but the souls of Lilith's descendants, cursed to remain in eternal torment as punishment for the dark pact their ancestor had made. But Lilith's ghost revealed something even more chilling. The curse was not only tied to the Blackwell bloodline, it had spread. Anyone who came into contact with the cemetery, anyone who dared to uncover its secrets, became part of the cycle. Evelyn, by opening the hidden chamber and revealing the altar, had unwittingly bound herself to the curse, Lilith's ghost stepped closer, her voice growing louder, more insistent. You are now one of us. You cannot leave. The children will follow you, just as they followed all the others. And in time, they will consume you, just as they consumed the Blackwell family. With a sudden, violent gust, the shadows leaped from the walls, swirling around Evelyn as the children's laughter intensified. The spirit of Lilith Blackwell reached out, her cold hands wrapping around Evelyn's throat, pulling her closer to the altar. Evelyn screamed, but no sound escaped her lips. The circle on the floor glowed with a sickly light, and Evelyn realized in that final moment, the tombs of St. Helena were not just holding the dead, they were holding a gateway to something far worse. Her vision blurred, and the shadows closed in. The next morning, a local groundskeeper found Evelyn's equipment scattered across the cemetery, her notes and recordings abandoned. But there was no sign of the journalist herself. The whispers and the laughter, however, remained. As new visitors came to St. Helena Cemetery, many reported hearing the faint, innocent sound of a child's giggle echoing through the night. Some even claimed to see a figure, a young woman, pale and lost, wandering among the tombstones, her hollow eyes forever seeking a way to escape the curse that had claimed her. The cemetery's legend grew, and over time, those who dared venture too close to the mausoleum began to vanish without a trace. Locals whispered that the children of St. Helena were not the only spirits to haunt the grounds. Those who dared to uncover the dark secrets of the Blackwell family would find themselves trapped in the cemetery, forever part of the twisted circle. The whispers never stopped, the laughter never ceased, and the shadow of Lilith Blackwell, along with her cursed lineage, lingered over St. Helena Cemetery, waiting for the next fool to unlock the door. In the heart of New Orleans, hidden among the winding streets and grand old houses, stood St. Helena Cemetery, a place known for its centuries-old tombs, crypts, and mausoleums, each telling the stories of the city's forgotten past. The cemetery had always been a quiet and somewhat eerie place, especially at night. The shadows of the towering oaks stretched long across the moss-covered ground, and the whispers of the dead seemed to linger in the cool air. Most locals avoided the cemetery after dusk, but one man wasn't afraid. Nolan Grant had been a night security guard at St. Helena for over 6 months. At first, he found peace in the solitude, the moonlight casting an ethereal glow over the graves, the slow shuffle of his footsteps on the old, cracked paths. It all had a certain tranquility. But soon, Nolan began to notice things that unsettled him. It started with the whispers, soft, barely audible voices, as though the very earth itself was speaking. Nolan shrugged it off, telling himself it was just the wind through the trees or his imagination playing tricks on him. But the whispers grew louder, always seeming to come from the direction of the old mausoleum at the far corner of the cemetery. The mausoleum, a large stone structure with intricate carvings, had long been abandoned, its entrance sealed shut for decades. Few knew who was buried inside, but it was said that the mausoleum was linked to the city's most notorious family, a family with a dark legacy. One night, as Nolan made his rounds, he caught sight of something unusual, a figure moving between the tombstones. It was a child, no older than 6 or 7, wearing a white dress, its edges frayed and stained with age. The child was playing near the mausoleum, spinning in circles, its laughter echoing across the cemetery. Nolan, confused and curious, approached the child, wondering who would be out here at such an hour. As he drew closer, the child stopped spinning and slowly turned to face him. Its face was pale, almost ashen, with deep, hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through him. Nolan froze, feeling a chill crawl up his spine. The child's voice was soft but clear, almost sing-song. "You shouldn't be here." Before Nolan could respond, The child vanished into the night, as though swallowed by the very shadows. The silence that followed was deafening. Nolan's heart pounded in his chest, and he quickly scanned the area, but the child was gone. He felt a strange unease settle over him, and as he finished his rounds, the whispers grew louder, now mixed with faint giggles and the distant sounds of children's laughter. The next morning, Nolan couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The whispers continued, and the laughter never seemed to cease, even during the day. He tried to ignore it, but his mind kept returning to the mausoleum. Something about it felt alive. Nolan was no longer just hearing whispers. He was beginning to see things. A shadow darting between the tombs, a fleeting figure at the edge of his vision. He knew then that something, or someone, was watching him. The strange occurrences escalated over the next few days. One night, while walking near the mausoleum, Nolan heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind him. He spun around, but no one was there. The whispering voices were now constant, almost as if they were speaking directly into his ear. The child's laughter rang out again, and this time it seemed closer, so close, in fact, that it sounded as if it were right next to him. Then on his final shift, everything changed. Nolan was walking past the mausoleum when the ground beneath him began to tremble. The mausoleum's entrance, once sealed tight, began to crack open, the stones sliding away with an unnatural force. Nolan tried to run, but his legs felt heavy, as though the earth itself was pulling him back. The whispers grew deafening, all speaking at once, and the child's laughter mixed with something darker, a low, guttural growl, like a beast waiting to pounce. Out of the darkness emerged the child again, its hollow eyes locking onto Nolan's. But this time, it wasn't alone. The shadows seemed to shift and take form, revealing a dozen or more children, pale, with dark eyes, their faces twisted in malice. They circled Nolan, their laughter turning into high-pitched, inhuman shrieks. One by one, they stepped closer to him, until the last child, its face obscured by a tattered veil, whispered, "You've opened the door." Nolan's heart raced as he backed away, but the shadows pressed forward, closing in on him. He could feel the weight of their eyes on him, and he knew, with a sickening certainty, that the mausoleum was not just a tomb, it was a prison. The children, he realized, were not alive. They were trapped souls, cursed to roam the cemetery for eternity, their bodies lost to time, but their spirits never able to rest. And someone long ago had broken the seal, releasing them. He ran, stumbling through the cemetery, desperate to escape the haunting laughter that pursued him. As he reached the gate, he glanced back one last time and saw the mausoleum fully open, its dark interior now teeming with shadowy figures that reached toward him. Nolan fled into the night, swearing never to return. The next day, Nolan quit his job and left New Orleans, leaving behind the cemetery's haunting whispers and the chilling image of the children's hollow eyes. He never spoke of the events that transpired, but he couldn't escape the memories. Every night, he still heard their laughter in his dreams. But the story didn't end with Nolan's departure. Though he left the cemetery behind, others continued to take his place. Over the years, visitors and other security guards reported strange occurrences at St. Helena. Those who worked the night shift claimed to hear the laughter of children echoing through the cemetery, faint whispers brushing against their ears. Some spoke of seeing figures darting between the tombstones, children playing in the moonlight, and shadows shifting in ways that defied logic. Years passed, and the legend of the haunted mausoleum grew. It became a place that tourists visited, some eager to experience the supernatural, others skeptical of the stories. But no one stayed after dark. They said the children's laughter could still be heard at night, a haunting reminder of the souls trapped within the cemetery. And on certain nights, If you were brave enough to stand near the mausoleum, you might still hear the whisper, "You shouldn't be here." As for Nolan, he tried to forget, but sometimes, in the still of the night, when the air grew thick with unease, he would hear the laughter once more, as though the children were never truly gone, waiting, just beyond the veil of the living, for the next person to stumble upon their tomb. Years after Nolan's harrowing escape from St. Helena Cemetery, the mystery of the mausoleum and the children remained unsolved. The cemetery's eerie reputation only grew, attracting more thrill seekers and paranormal investigators, each hoping to unravel its dark secrets. But the whispers, the laughter, and the shadowy figures persisted, taunting those who dared to venture into the graveyard at night. One evening, a young journalist named Evelyn Martell arrived in New Orleans with the intent to write a piece about the city's haunted history. Having heard the legends of St. Helena, she was determined to uncover the truth behind the stories. Unlike the many visitors before her, Evelyn was not easily spooked. She had spent years researching the supernatural and had come prepared with cameras, audio equipment, and a deep desire for answers. Her research quickly led her to the cemetery and to the mausoleum that had haunted so many. Evelyn learned that the Blackwell family, long known for their wealth and influence in New Orleans, had once occupied the crypt. But there were no records of any family members being buried there in recent decades. Rumors, however, suggested something more sinister. The family's sudden disappearance had been linked to a powerful, ancient curse tied to their bloodline, something that had kept their souls trapped in the cemetery, unable to move on. Intrigued, Evelyn began spending her nights in the cemetery, determined to uncover the truth. On her third night, she experienced the same chilling events that had plagued the security guards and visitors before her: the cold whispers, the laughter of unseen children, and the feeling of being watched. But Evelyn pressed on, her resolve only growing stronger. Then, one night, as the fog rolled in thick around the tombstones, Evelyn discovered something that would change everything. While investigating the mausoleum, she noticed an engraving on one of the nearby crypts, a name that had never appeared in any of the town records: Lilith Blackwell. The name struck her like a bolt of lightning. Evelyn knew that Lilith Blackwell was believed to have been the last matriarch of the Blackwell family, rumored to have been a witch who had made a pact with an ancient, malevolent force to ensure her family's wealth and power. According to legend, Lilith had been the one to curse her descendants, binding their souls to the cemetery when the pact turned dark. However, what Evelyn uncovered next was far more disturbing. Hidden beneath the overgrown ivy and moss was a small, concealed entrance to a hidden chamber beneath the mausoleum. The air inside the chamber was thick with the scent of decay, but Evelyn's flashlight illuminated something even more unsettling. Etched into the stone floor were the faint remnants of a large, intricate circle inscribed with strange symbols. In the center of the circle lay a blood-stained altar, long abandoned, but still emanating an oppressive energy. As Evelyn stepped closer to the altar, a cold wind swept through the chamber, and the shadows seemed to pulse around her. The whispers began again, louder this time, reverberating in the confined space. A child's laughter echoed from the darkness, and Evelyn felt a growing unease settle over her. But then a voice, deep, ancient, and almost familiar, spoke to her. "You've unlocked the door." A figure emerged from the shadows, its form barely visible in the dim light. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as she realized it wasn't a child, but something much older. It was Lilith Blackwell, her ghostly form hovering just above the ground, her eyes hollow and empty. The woman's face was contorted in agony, her lips curled into a twisted smile. "You think you can free them?" Lilith rasped, her voice a hollow echo of its former self. "You think you can break the curse?" Evelyn stumbled backward, realizing with horror that the children's laughter wasn't just a haunting. It was the sound of trapped souls, forever bound to the mausoleum. These were not innocent spirits, but the souls of Lilith's descendants, cursed to remain in eternal torment as punishment for the dark pact their ancestor had made. But Lilith's ghost revealed something even more chilling. The curse was not only tied to the Blackwell bloodline, it had spread. Anyone who came into contact with the cemetery, anyone who dared to uncover its secrets, became part of the cycle. Evelyn, by opening the hidden chamber and revealing the altar, had unwittingly bound herself to the curse. Lilith's ghost stepped closer, her voice growing louder, more insistent. "You are now one of us. You cannot leave. The children will follow you, just as they followed all the others. And in time, they will consume you, just as they consumed the Blackwell family." With a sudden, violent gust, the shadows leaped from the walls, swirling around Evelyn as the children's laughter intensified. The spirit of Lilith Blackwell reached out, her cold hands wrapping around Evelyn's throat, pulling her closer to the altar. Evelyn screamed, but no sound escaped her lips. The circle on the floor glowed with a sickly light, and Evelyn realized in that final moment, the tombs of St. Helena were not just holding the dead, they were holding a gateway to something far worse. Her vision blurred, and the shadows closed in. The next morning, a local groundskeeper found Evelyn's equipment scattered across the cemetery, her notes and recordings abandoned, but there was no sign of the journalist herself. The whispers and the laughter, however, remained. As new visitors came to St. Helena Cemetery, many reported hearing the faint, innocent sound of a child's giggle echoing through the night. Some even claimed to see a figure, a young woman, pale and lost, wandering among the tombstones, her hollow eyes forever seeking a way to escape the curse that had claimed her. The cemetery's legend grew, and over time, those who dared venture too close to the mausoleum began to vanish without a trace. Locals whispered that the children of St. Helena were not the only spirits to haunt the grounds. Those who dared to uncover the dark secrets of the Blackwell family would find themselves trapped in the cemetery, forever part of the twisted circle. The whispers never stopped, the laughter never ceased, and the shadow of Lilith Blackwell, along with her cursed lineage, lingered over St. Helena Cemetery, waiting for the next fool to unlock the door. The cursed tombstone. In the mist-covered hills of a small, isolated village in Japan, there lay a forgotten cemetery, its ancient tombstones weathered by time and the elements, and its stories whispered only by the winds. Among the tombstones was one that stood out from the rest, not because of its age or grandeur, but because it bore no name, only a strange symbol etched deep into the stone. The symbol, an intricate design of curving lines and angular shapes, was unfamiliar to anyone who saw it. Locals referred to it simply as the mark, and for generations, they had avoided the tombstone, speaking of it only in hushed tones. They believed it was cursed. Legend had it that the tombstone marked the grave of a woman named Aiko, whose death had been shrouded in mystery. No one knew how she had died, but the stories that circulated were enough to terrify even the bravest villagers. It was said that Aiko had been a powerful sorceress, cursed by a rival for some unspeakable transgression. Her spirit was said to be bound to the tombstone by a spell, and any who dared to touch the symbol would awaken her wrath, becoming haunted by her restless spirit. Despite the warnings, a group of 6 teenagers, tired of the mundane life in their village, decided to test the legend one fateful night. They were fearless, emboldened by their bravado, and they set out with a dare: touch the cursed tombstone and prove that there was nothing to fear. Led by Kaito, the group's unofficial leader, they ventured to the cemetery under the cover of darkness, armed only with their curiosity and the bravado of youth. The moment they arrived at the tombstone, An eerie quiet settled over the cemetery. The full moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the gravestones. They stood in front of the cursed tombstone, the strange symbol glowing faintly in the moonlight. No one spoke for a moment, each of them unsure of how to proceed. Finally, Kaido stepped forward, his hand reaching for the symbol, his heart racing with a mix of excitement and fear. "This is it," he whispered, more to himself than to the others. "One touch, and it's all over." He placed his hand on the symbol. The air grew colder, and a shiver ran down everyone's spine. They heard a distant, soft whisper that seemed to echo from the depths of the cemetery. Kaido pulled his hand back, but the whispering grew louder, clearer. The other teens watched him with wide eyes, but Kaido shrugged it off, trying to act casual. "See? Nothing happened," he said, his voice shaky. But he was wrong. Over the next few days, each of the teenagers began experiencing strange occurrences. It started with subtle things, shadows flickering at the edge of their vision, objects moving on their own, whispers just beyond their hearing. But then, the nightmares began. Aiko's ghostly figure, pale and indistinct, appeared at the foot of their beds every night, standing silently, her eyes vacant and filled with an endless sorrow. She whispered in a language none of them understood, an ancient, unintelligible tongue that sent chills down their spines. It was a voice that seemed to speak directly into their souls, making their blood run cold and their hearts pound in their chests. The teenagers tried to ignore the horrors, telling themselves it was just a figment of their imagination, the result of a silly dare gone too far. But as the nights wore on, the encounters grew worse. The whispers started to invade their waking moments, strange voices that echoed in their minds, impossible to ignore. They began to feel the presence of something, someone watching them at all times, always just behind them, just out of sight. And then, one night, one of them, Ryu, the quietest of the group, disappeared. It happened on a stormy evening. The others were gathered at Kaido's house, talking in hushed tones about their experiences. They had tried everything, burning incense, chanting prayers, even visiting the local shrine, but nothing had worked. Ryu had been distant for days, and when he hadn't shown up for their latest meeting, they grew worried. The next day, Ryu's body was found in the cemetery, lying motionless next to the cursed tombstone. His eyes were wide open, staring into nothingness, as if he had seen something that had driven him to madness. His mouth was frozen in a silent scream, his body cold and stiff. The symbol on the tombstone was now darkened, as though something had marked it. The police were called, but no one could explain Ryu's death. There were no signs of physical injury, no explanation for how he had ended up at the tombstone. The only clue was the strange, unfamiliar symbol, now more pronounced than ever. The remaining 5 teens, shaken to their core, tried to piece together what had happened. They realized that their lives had been irrevocably changed the moment they touched the cursed tombstone. They had awoken something dark, something ancient. Desperate to find answers, Kaido sought the help of an elderly woman from the village, a former priestess who had long since retired from her spiritual duties. She was known for her knowledge of the supernatural, and when Kaido explained what had been happening, her expression darkened. "You've unleashed Aiko's spirit," the woman said gravely. Aiko was no ordinary sorceress. She made a pact with an ancient deity, one that required the sacrifice of many lives. But when she tried to break the pact, she was bound to the tombstone, cursed to wander the world of the living and the dead. The woman paused, her eyes narrowing with concern. But Aiko's spirit can never be freed unless the one who touched the tombstone makes the ultimate sacrifice. Only through blood, through the blood of the one who dared to awaken her, can the curse be broken. Kaido, his heart sinking, realized what this meant. The spirit of Aiko was not just haunting them. It was feeding off their fear, growing stronger with each passing day. And to stop it, one of them had to give their life, willingly, to end the curse once and for all. But Aiko's spirit was clever. It wasn't done yet. As the days passed, the remaining teens began to unravel, their minds fraying under the constant presence of the ghost. The whispers grew louder, and each night, Aiko's pale figure appeared more and more vividly. Kaido knew that he was the one who had touched the tombstone first, the one who had triggered this chain of events. It was his responsibility to end it. But when he returned to the cemetery that fateful night, standing before the cursed tombstone once again, he realized the truth. Aiko's spirit had already claimed him. He had been haunted long before he knew it. As he reached out to touch the symbol one final time, the ground beneath him trembled. The air thickened, and the whispers turned into screams. Aiko's form emerged from the shadows, her eyes hollow and empty, her voice now a cacophony of tortured souls. "You are mine," she whispered as Kaido's body froze, his soul bound to hers forever. The others never saw Kaido again, and as time passed, the curse of the tombstone grew stronger. The cemetery was abandoned, its secrets left to fester in the shadows, waiting for the next unwitting souls to come too close. Those who dared approach the tombstone at night were never seen again, their bodies left cold and lifeless next to the cursed grave. And somewhere, deep in the darkness of the cemetery, the whispers of Aiko's spirit continued to echo, forever seeking the next sacrifice to feed her restless, vengeful soul. The singing ghost of St. Mary's. In the remote hills of County Cork, Ireland, there lies an ancient Catholic cemetery, one that has stood the test of centuries. The gravestones, weathered and worn, tell the stories of the many souls who once called this land home. But among all the names and dates etched in a stone, there is one grave that stands out, a small, unassuming tombstone at the far end of the cemetery. It belongs to a young woman named Aisling O'Connell, who died in 1843 at the age of 22. Aisling's death has long been a mystery, but the one thing that is certain is that she was a talented singer, known far and wide for her beautiful voice. Legends say that she was the daughter of a renowned priest who disapproved of her pursuit of music, believing it to be a distraction from her spiritual duties. Despite his wishes, Aisling continued to sing, enchanting everyone who heard her, from the poor peasants to the wealthiest landowners. The most haunting part of Aisling's story, however, lies in her death. She was found one cold winter morning, her body lying in the snow near the churchyard. It was said she had been walking home after a performance when she collapsed, her life taken by the biting cold. But there were no witnesses, and the townspeople were quick to spread rumors. Some whispered that Aisling had been struck down by a curse for defying her father. Others believed that she had been the victim of a tragic, unrequited love. But whatever the cause of her death, Aisling's story was sealed when she was buried in the church cemetery. Her grave, however, would not remain silent. It wasn't long after her burial that strange occurrences began to unfold. Visitors to the cemetery started to hear a beautiful, mournful song floating on the wind late at night. The haunting melody seemed to come from nowhere, drifting through the gravestones, filling the air with an almost ethereal sadness. Some claimed the song was Aisling's, a ghostly echo of the voice that had once filled concert halls. Others thought it might be a local woman, taking advantage of the legend to attract attention. But as time went on, the song became more than just a rumor. Those brave enough to venture into the cemetery after dark would tell stories of seeing a faint, glowing figure sitting on Aisling's tombstone, singing softly to the night. The figure was always described as a young woman dressed in a flowing white gown, her face obscured by long, dark hair. She seemed to be lost in her song, her voice so pure and full of sorrow that it would send chills down the spine of anyone who dared approach. But there was a darker side to the tale. Visitors who attempted to record the singing would find that their devices malfunctioned the moment they got too close to Ashling's grave. Cameras would freeze, phones would lose all power, and some even claimed their devices turned on by themselves, playing back distorted versions of the haunting song in the dead of night. It was as if Ashling's voice was trying to reach out from beyond the grave, unwilling to be captured or confined. Rumors began to spread that those who listened too closely to the song would be drawn into the grave itself. It was said that Ashling's spirit was not content with simply haunting the cemetery. She sought new voices, new souls to join her in her eternal lament. Locals would warn anyone who came near the grave not to stay too long, for they feared that the song was a lure, a trap to pull the living into the depths of the grave. One autumn evening, a group of curious tourists arrived in the village, eager to experience the famous legend for themselves. Among them was Sarah, a young journalist from Dublin, determined to write a feature on the mysterious happenings in the cemetery. She had heard the stories, of course, but she didn't believe in ghosts or spirits. She was a woman of reason, and she had no intention of being swayed by local superstition. Armed with her camera and notebook, Sarah set out alone for the cemetery just after dusk. As Sarah entered the old graveyard, the wind howled through the trees, and the air grew cold. She could feel an uneasy stillness settling over the place, as though the very earth was holding its breath. But when she reached Ashling's grave, she stopped in her tracks. The song was there, filling the air with a mournful melody, so hauntingly beautiful that Sarah's breath caught in her chest. The sound seemed to come from the very earth itself, as if the tombstone were somehow alive, vibrating with the ghostly power of Ashling's voice. Sarah fumbled with her camera, desperate to capture the sound, but as she raised it to her ear, her vision blurred, and the song grew louder, more insistent. Suddenly, Sarah saw the figure, faint, glowing, and sitting on the tombstone. A woman, her long hair cascading over her shoulders, her white gown flowing in the breeze. The ghostly figure's face was hidden, but Sarah could feel the sorrow in her presence, a sadness so deep it seemed to seep into her bones. She watched in a trance, captivated by the beauty of the song. It was like nothing she had ever heard before, pure and haunting, as if it came from another world. The figure's lips moved, but the words were in an unfamiliar language, the syllables strange and foreign. Yet, the song spoke to her on a deeper level, one that resonated in her very soul. The next thing Sarah knew, the song stopped abruptly. The figure turned to her, and for the first time, Sarah saw her face. It was Ashling's face, pale and gaunt, her eyes hollow and filled with an unnatural darkness. The sorrow on her face turned to a twisted smile, and the words she whispered were barely audible, carried on the wind. "Come with me." Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she felt an irresistible pull toward the tombstone. The ground beneath her seemed to shift, and before she knew it, she was standing at the foot of Ashling's grave, her hand reaching out toward the glowing figure. But something in her mind snapped into focus. The song, the haunting melody, was not just a song, it was a spell. Ashling's voice, soft and sweet, was drawing her in, luring her to her doom. Sarah snapped back to reality, stumbling backward, her heart pounding in her chest. She broke free from the trance, running toward the exit of the cemetery, her breath ragged and frantic. As she glanced back, she saw Aisling standing in the distance, watching her with cold, empty eyes. The song resumed, but this time, it was more distorted, a maddening sound that seemed to reverberate through the very air itself. When Sarah returned to her hotel, she checked her camera, hoping to find proof of the ghostly encounter. But to her horror, there was nothing. No footage, no sound, just a series of corrupted files. The song, the voice, everything she had heard and seen was gone. Only the feeling of dread remained, lingering in her mind. But that night, Sarah couldn't sleep. As she lay in bed, a soft, mournful song filled the room. It was so faint at first that she thought it was just the wind, but then it grew louder, clearer. The same beautiful melody, the same haunting voice. Sarah knew then that Ashling's curse had found her. The next morning, Sarah was gone. No one knows what happened to her, but locals claim they still hear her name whispered on the wind, caught forever in the song of Ashling, just another lost soul pulled into the grave. To this day, those who visit the cemetery speak of hearing the mournful song echoing through the trees, and the faint glow of a figure sitting on the tombstone, singing into the night. Some say Ashling's voice still calls out, searching for those who will listen too closely, and those who do never leave. The gatekeeper of the forgotten cemetery. In the dense, fog-shrouded woods of northern Pennsylvania, a forgotten cemetery rests, hidden beneath an endless sea of tangled vines and gnarled trees. The place is rarely spoken of, and even fewer dare to venture close to it. Locals, especially those who have lived in the area for generations, speak in hushed tones about the ancient graveyard, warning outsiders to steer clear of its boundaries. It is a place known only as the Hollow of the Forsaken. For the souls of those buried, there are said to be restless, caught between this world and the next, waiting for something, someone, to release them. The cemetery has been abandoned for centuries. The names on the tombstones are barely legible, worn away by time and nature's reclaiming grasp. Some say the place was once the final resting ground of an entire village that was wiped out in a plague, their bodies hastily buried beneath the earth. Others claim it was a burial ground for those who had committed unspeakable crimes, cursed by the very soil they were buried in. But no matter the origin, one thing is certain. The cemetery is no ordinary graveyard. Legend tells of a tall, shadowy figure that stands at the entrance, cloaked in black, its face hidden beneath a hood. Those who approach the cemetery report feeling a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread. Some even claim to hear a voice, low, gravelly, and warning them to turn back. Do not enter, it says. The earth will claim you. But there are always those who, drawn by curiosity or a thirst for adventure, ignore the warnings. They push past the threshold, only to find themselves caught in something far more sinister than they could ever imagine. A group of 6 friends from a nearby town, tired of the mundane life in their small community, decided to test the legend one late autumn evening. Armed with flashlights and a sense of bravado, they ventured into the woods, eager to discover the truth behind the stories that had haunted the town for so long. The air was thick with fog, and the trees loomed like silent sentinels, their twisted branches reaching toward the sky. As they approached the cemetery, the first sign that something was wrong became apparent. A heavy, oppressive silence hung in the air, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The only sound was the crunch of leaves beneath their feet. And then they saw him. The figure stood at the entrance, his tall form obscured by the shadows. His eyes gleamed in the dim light, 2 pinpricks of light that seemed to pierce the fog. Without a word, he lifted a hand and gestured for them to stop. His voice, when it came, was like the rustling of dead leaves. Leave now, or you will never leave at all. The friends exchanged nervous glances, but their desire to prove the legend wrong overpowered their growing fear. They ignored the warning and stepped forward, pushing past the figure and into the cemetery. From the moment they entered, the temperature dropped. It wasn't just the coolness of the autumn night. It was a chilling, unnatural cold that seemed to seep into their bones. The ground beneath their feet felt uneven, as if the earth itself was shifting and unsettled. The air grew thick with a strange energy, and the friends felt an invisible pressure pushing down on them, urging them to kneel, to fall to the earth. As they ventured deeper into the graveyard, the sensation intensified. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the earth itself was reaching out, pulling them toward the ground. One of the group, Anna, stumbled, her knees buckling beneath her as if some unseen force had pressed her down. She reached out to steady herself, but her hands touched something cold, something alive. It was a hand, large, pale, and covered in dirt. It was reaching up from the soil, fingers twisted and gnarled, as if it had been buried for centuries. Panic surged through the group, and they quickly pulled Anna to her feet, but the hand remained, twitching slightly as though it was aware of their presence. "Did you see that?" Mark, one of the bravest of the group, whispered, his voice trembling, but no one answered. They were too focused on the feeling of being watched, of being surrounded by unseen eyes. The deeper they went into the cemetery, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The graves, some of them barely visible beneath the overgrowth, seemed to shift before their eyes. It was as if the ground itself was alive, breathing, waiting. The tombstones, their inscriptions long eroded, now appeared to be moving, twisting in the dim light, their angles changing as if the earth beneath them was not stable. Suddenly, one of the tombstones collapsed inward, revealing a gaping hole in the ground. A low moan, deep and guttural, rose from the earth. The ground shook beneath their feet, and the friends watched in horror as hands, dozens of them, began to emerge from the soil. They were pale, covered in dirt, and impossibly long, their fingers clawing at the air, grasping toward anything in reach. One by one, the group was pulled toward the graves. Mark screamed as hands wrapped around his ankles, pulling him into the earth. His body vanished beneath the soil, swallowed by the ground as if he had never existed. The others struggled to free him, but the earth was relentless, dragging them down with it. The cemetery itself seemed to open its mouth, hungry for the living. Only Anna and her best friend, Laura, managed to escape the pull of the earth. But as they ran, they found themselves lost in the woods, the cemetery now a distant memory, or so they thought. They had fled, but they weren't free. Over the next few days, both Anna and Laura began to change. They heard whispers in the dark, voices that seemed to come from beneath their feet. At night, they would wake to find their beds covered in dirt, their bodies marked with strange symbols. The nightmares began, the same hand reaching for them, the same chilling song rising from the ground, luring them back to the cemetery. But the real horror came when they discovered that the cemetery was no longer in the woods. It had moved. The place had shifted, its boundaries changing every night, as if the cemetery itself were alive, seeking new victims to add to its cursed soil. The shadowy figure at the entrance was no longer just a warning. He was part of the curse, an eternal guardian who would keep the cemetery's secrets safe from those who would try to uncover them. And as Anna and Laura searched for answers, they uncovered something far more terrifying. The cemetery had been built on the ruins of an ancient ritual site, a place where those who had died under mysterious circumstances were buried in order to keep their restless spirits contained. The cemetery wasn't just a graveyard. It was a prison for the lost, a place where the dead and the living were bound together in eternal torment. In the end, the two women found themselves drawn back to the hollow of the forsaken, unable to escape the pull of the earth. They, too, were swallowed by the ground, becoming part of the cemetery's endless cycle. And every year, when the fog rolls in thick and heavy, travelers who dare enter the woods report hearing faint screams echoing through the trees. Some claim to see a shadowy figure standing at the entrance, warning them to turn back. But most never listen. Thank you all for watching. Please like and subscribe for more scary stories.